Hello and welcome to Save Your Sanity live stream. I'm Rhoberta Shaler, and my guest today is Denise Bossarte, and we are going to be talking about her life, her journey, and how she came to heal, and what she offers people because she has a wonderful new book. And we're going to talk about that book, which is called Thriving After Sexual Abuse. So you can tell we've got a lot to talk about. Welcome to the show, Denise.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, it's great to have you in an upcoming episode of Save Your Sanity podcast. You will be featured. So it's nice to introduce you to the folks now. And what is it that your journey prompted you to write this book?
Well, it came at a time when I learned about Dr. Larry Nassar's abuse of the Olympic gymnast a few years ago. And it really broke my heart to hear about all of these women, one person impacting all of these women. And I'm a person that has some of those effects of trauma where I don't have a lot of research on, very graphic, but not a lot of them. But particularly, I can't place those abuse memories in a timeline that I could write a memoir. So for a very long time, although I wanted to share my story, I just wasn't sure how to do that. But when this came out about the gymnast, I realized that I had a story of healing that I could actually offer out to people like those gymnasts who had gone through such a traumatic situation. And I could share the different things that I had done on my healing journey as an example, as an inspiration, maybe even a blueprint for people to follow that were trying to either start a healing journey or wanting to do more along a healing journey. So that was really that news story, and just hearing about these women really inspired me to take that step.
Great. I had a previous podcast called Emotional Savvy, and one of the first episodes, I mean, the first 5 episodes, there's a wonderful topic in there on the Larry Nassar story
Mm.
because I started it at the same time. So we were thinking about things at the same time. But you brought up something that I think everybody is really important for people to notice is you said you had bits and pieces of the story. You did not have a clear timeline and all the pieces. And that's very common when there's
Mhm.
sexual abuse in our young life. We have snippets of it. We have memories. We have sensory memories of doors opening or things happening, but we don't necessarily know exactly when they happened or in what order. And that's what you were alluding to, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. That was my experience that I had, as you said, all of the things that you described. I have sound memories, I have a lot of body memories, and there's just this overwhelming sense of fear. I was terrified of my grandfather, who was my abuser. I was terrified of him. And just that emotion, anytime something triggers me that reminds me, seeing someone that looks like him or at his age, or the smell, the certain shampoo he used to use. There's little small things, and a lot of it for me is just that feeling of flight freeze kind of situation where you're frozen in terror of what's going to happen, and the fact you have no control over that situation when you're a child. That the only way you can really escape is to sort of dissociate and just kind of leave your body, and
Yeah.
but it's still absorbing all of those experiences even if you're not consciously there at the time. It absorbs all of that, and then those things can come up again later.
Mhm. And what you're talking about is the freeze response. And I'm doing a podcast on that in a few weeks, but we get into that place when we have childhood memories that was before we had full brain function. It's
Mhm.
really important for people who were abused, particularly before the age of 7, to realize that your brain was not fully formed at that time. It doesn't really be fully formed until you're 30, but not much happens after 25. But what a lot happens in the first 7 years. And somewhere up to the age of 7, usually 5, 6, we develop parietal and prefrontal lobe functions more fully. Then we start to kick in with the what and the where and the who, and that's not right and all that. But up until then, it's just all these emotional sensory memories. Sometimes people don't even have language when they've been abused. It's so
Mhm.
early, right? So it's so important to have this conversation for people who are thinking, well, I don't know if I was abused. Maybe I was, maybe I wasn't. Well, I don't know either, but I could certainly help you determine whether or not your memories have a story to tell you. It's so important to figure out, because we don't want to think that. We don't want to have that thought in our background, but when we have it, and it is terrifying, as you said, it does create that freeze response. You know, I realized early on my father was my abuser. I realized early on that any man that combed his hair like my father, had the facial features of my father, had the similar body type as my father. Mm-mm.
Mhm.
No, absolutely couldn't. And there were some lovely men I had to pass on who I really appreciated their company, but no, I couldn't do it. Did you find that too?
Yeah, I didn't have so much trouble very specifically with people who reminded me of my grandfather, but as you said, it happened very early on. I don't know exactly when it started, but I do have a relative understanding of how tall I was to my grandfather. I wasn't even at his waist height, so I was a pretty young kid, and I was tall for my age too. Um, but it wasn't that I learned specifically to avoid particular types of men. It was I learned that the world was not a safe place. It
Yeah.
totally set my worldview. It was world's not a safe place, and people who care about you can and will hurt you badly. And so here I was as a young child trying to figure out how do I relate with the world? How do I deal with people? How does all that work? And the overall all influence was it's a scary place and you have no control over what happens to you. And the bad people are actually your family sometimes. So that was
Yes.
really impactful. And that influenced my overall approach to the world about me being a really kind of creative, not gregarious child, but a people friendly child and enjoyed being out in groups. And after the abuse started, my personality changed. I became a total introvert, was really not wanting to go out and socialize that much. And I had an older cousin who was also abused by my grandfather, and she was a teenager when my personality shifted. And she told me later, she told herself, he got to her too. But she
Oh.
wasn't in a place where she could do anything for me. She was dealing with her own stuff. She was, a teenager. What was she going to do? But it really was very broad for me on how much it impacted how willing I was to trust people. So it was something that started that kind of worldview, and that impact started when I was very young, and it just kept going and going and going. He died when I was a freshman in high school, and that's when the abuse stopped. I was starting to learn how to avoid him. I was getting savvy enough, how do I avoid being alone with this man if at all possible? But,
Mhm.
you couldn't always avoid him. But when he died of prostate cancer, which I said is, karma
Karma.
very quickly, very quickly. But I still, at that time, when I was young, my brain tried to help me out. I think my mind tried to help me out, but I didn't really remember the specifics when I was young. But as I said, this emotion of being afraid of him, you want to run up to your grandfather or your grandparents, hugs and kisses and love. I want to be as far away from him as possible. Don't sit me next to him at the dinner table, kind of fear. And when I got to be a freshman and he died, all of a sudden I started remembering things and all the stuff you mentioned, the sound memories, the body memories, the visual memories. And I thought I was going crazy. I was like overwhelmed, but at the same time, things started making more sense to me. I was like, well, no
Mhm.
wonder I was afraid of him if this was what was happening to me. But I couldn't deal with it. I mean, it was just too much. I was afraid to tell anyone because of the overwhelming shame I felt about it. Again, I had internalized the idea it was my fault, so I
Mhm.
couldn't tell anyone. My grandfather taught me I was worthless, I was unlovable, no one would believe me, and I was on my own. And so I had no coping skills as a teenager other than to simply immerse myself into academics and sports and music and just keep so busy. I had no time to think about it, no time to dwell on it. And so I just plowed on through without processing anything until I got to college and a friend helped me get into therapy for the first time.
Wow. That's really long-term abuse, Denise.
Hmm.
If you have a memory of being just up to his waist and it went on until you're a freshman in high school and no one to tell, was your family not safe? Did you I mean, I realized that you were threatened. That's what they do, "Well, this is our secret," or, "Hey, don't you dare tell," or something awful will happen. I mean, they're very, very crafty about what they want, but was there no safe person in your family that you felt you could turn to?
I guess I just didn't feel that way at the time. I mean, the abuse happened when we would spend summers with my grandparents. So my parents and my cousin's parents would drop us off for the summer, and it was really from the outside very idyllic. It was a modern cabin on a lake. There was boating and fishing and swimming and skiing and all kinds of great stuff. But
Yeah.
on the side, there was the abuse. And I guess I didn't trust because he had taught me that people who should care about you hurt you. I expanded that, to kind of say, well, I can't trust anybody, and who's going to
Mm,
believe me? Who's going to believe me? Because I knew he never that I remember he never specifically said to me, "Don't tell," but he was so intimidating, so controlling, an ex-military guy,
yeah.
6'4", very manipulative and controlling, very bright guy, and he knew how to, make me feel like I was on my own, and I just didn't find a way that I think that I could tell anyone. I just was afraid that if I told people the little bit of love I was getting in my family that was healthy, I thought that if I told them that would go away because they would realize what a horrible, awful kid I was, and I would lose what little I had. So there was the risk. Do I tell and try to get it to stop, or do I, not tell and keep getting the little bit of affirmation and love I do because I felt, and how crazy is that I felt I had this power, as this little child, I felt I had this power to determine how people were going to look at me and how they would treat me.
That's
There's
not
so,
crazy. That's not
it,
crazy. That's what happens. Basically until we have this, development of the parietal and prefrontal lobes somewhere between 6, 7-ish. Before that, we're really just vibrating sacks of emotional nerve endings. We honestly do believe we have that kind of power. We have the power to get people to feed us and take care of us, and we hope we have that power. And so what you're saying makes absolute sense. It's not that you were, thinking that you had undue power over everybody. That's actually the way it works. But the things that you're talking about are so familiar to so many people, I'm sure, listening, because children are entrusted to parents and grandparents, and everybody thinks that it's a good thing, and generally it is. But then we have these situations where it is simply not, right? And
absolutely.
I just want to remind everybody we're talking about a story of abuse with a healthy ending. My guest is Denise Bossarte, and she's written a book called Thriving After Sexual Abuse. And I highly recommend that you go to thrivingaftersexualabusebook.com and have a look at that book. So you had the opportunity, or finally took the opportunity, when your grandfather died. Did you have some triggering events that at that time, aside from his death, some events that you first remembered, things that really stood out, and then you started to piece it together?
I think it was really body memories that led into sort of these little vignettes of experiences because he had a workshop down on the bottom floor of their house. It was kind of, you could drive down into the space, and there was a separate bedroom area there that the kids would stay in. And he had this little workshop, and that's where he would corner me. The grandma would say, "Go get grandpa for dinner." And I was like, no, send somebody else, but that's where he would corner me. And so I started having memories of what he would do in that space. And also memories of if we had enough grandkids there, some of them would stay downstairs, some of them would stay upstairs in the spare bedroom or on the sofa in the living room, just, kind of taking up space and where we could
Mhm.
fit. And I would be remembering how terrified I was when he got up in the night to go to the bathroom and would walk by
Oh,
the
yeah.
sofa, or
Mhm.
in the morning when he'd come in to get his socks and things, and I was in the bed and I was in this isolated room again, away from everybody else, pretending to be asleep, praying that, it wouldn't happen. So it was these
Mhm.
little kind of moments of the experience of the abuse, or the fear, stark fear of him coming and being close to me and not sure what was going to happen in the dark. So those were
Mhm.
the things that came to me. Um,
Well, the dark is a big trigger for many people who have been abused. I know, from my abuse story, I work with lots of people, of course, who have similar stories, but I came to understand that I thought that even though I was terrified, and this is me as an adult, I thought that even though I was really uncomfortable in the dark still, that I should power on through and I should fix that. And I had no right to be afraid of the dark. I was an adult. And when I was about 40, I just said, that's ridiculous. Put a light on.
so
Right.
simple a solution, right?
So, in my home, there's always a light on at night that allows me to see from the bed into the main part of the house. The light is on
Mhm.
in the main part of the house. No more problem with that kind of concern. But we have a couple of comments. One of our listeners, Mystique, said hello to both of us. Hi, Mystique. And then Latoria said, that's terrible that you were not safe around your grandfather. So I'll just tell everyone who's listening that you're quite welcome to ask us questions. Put them in the chat. We'll be happy to answer them. And feel free to do that. So once you had the memory and things started to pop out, and you did, in fact, in college, get to a therapist, um, what kind of start did you have to your healing journey?
It really was about looking at my behaviors and that had evolved out of the abuse. Now, as an adult, there's things that I was doing that were not healthy for me to continue. I had developed these behaviors that kind of saved my life and my sanity when I was a kid going through the abuse, but they weren't healthy to continue doing those, and were impacting my ability to have healthy relationships and my own self-image. I had really low self-esteem. Even though I was successful in school, I just never thought I was good enough. I had a real horrible body image. I hated my
Mm,
body, didn't relate
yeah.
to it. So there was a lot of work to do about my own self image and how I saw myself, which then translated into how I wanted to be in relationships. And we didn't spend much time looking back and trying to analyze what happened. It happened. I had memories. The focus was on the current behaviors and what I wanted to change. And so I not only was going through the therapy, the counseling individually, they also got me into a group, which was fantastic. It was a group of survivors of trauma and sexual abuse, and being able to talk to people
Right, right.
to hear that my story wasn't the
Connect.
only one. Yeah, to connect with them, to hear my story and their stories, to see myself and what they were going through, and to see the people who were further along their healing journey, and to realize, well, that could be me. I could get to that point where I was feeling better about myself and better able to have relationships. So that was very inspiring. And my friend got me into a Survivors of Incest Anonymous group. It's
Oh,
12-step based group, but they had men and women. It's the first time I ever had the concept that a man could be abused instead of
oh,
being the
oh,
perpetrator, right?
uh-huh.
It
Yep.
was eye opening. And there was a man there who was about the age my grandfather was when he was abusing me, and that man had been abused by his mother. And to hear his story, I was like, shifted. Okay, not all men of this age are perpetrators. It was kind of like,
Right,
oh,
right,
you can
right.
shift that. But it was a lot of work to figure out how I wanted to be as a person, how I wanted to show up, how I wanted to be in relationships, and learning to love myself and appreciate myself, be kind to myself, be able to do self care, get involved in things that would support and sustain me and build my resilience instead of always the negativity that I had carried with me for so long.
Mhm. Well, you brought up a few really good points. One of the things about being in a support group is is that you actually don't any longer feel alone. And that's a big deal, because when you're isolated and experiencing things that no child should experience, or if you've been with a hijackal, my term for people who hijack relationships for their own needs and purposes and then
Mhm.
relentlessly scavenge them for power, status, and control. When you've been with a hijackal, whether it's a hijackal parent or a hijackal partner or sibling or whatever, you also feel very isolated and marginalized. That's what they want that to happen. So being in a group can really have, which is why I have my emerging empowered community completely safely off social media. It's on my
Mhm.
website. But the members there, the members of the community, can chat with each other in different discussion threads. They can come to 2 Ask Me Anything calls, group calls with me every month. They get new ebooks and videos and things sent to them every 20 days or so. So there's always something for them, but they are safe away from social media, and they are interactive by people who simply have had that experience, are going through that, maybe are just recognizing they're having it, and then we have community. So I really appreciate you talking about that and its value to you.
Mhm.
So many of these things are incredibly difficult to deal with, so for people who are interested in looking at all these things on the side here, interested in my emerging empowered community, simply go to joinintoday.com. Joinintoday.com, and you can be part of it too. And now is a very good time to join, because the membership is going up in a while. And this is a very, very good time to join. So you've learned a lot of modalities that have worked for you. I know that you are an award-winning poet and a writer and a photographer, and an artist. So how has your art been useful to you?
It's really been a wonderful healing modality. I never went in specifically into art therapy, but what I did was I explored new things that helped me tap into my creativity. That was one thing that really felt like it was stolen away from me. I mentioned before, I was a creative child when writing and drawing and things, and really lost that was during the abuse. And to be able to tap in back into that sort of I love to create and explore new things and be creative, that attitude of openness that a child has, and
Right.
really connect more with my inner child. I think that's really what was happening. I was connecting back with that inner child and providing some healing to be safely curious and expressive, to have a voice. If but it was a voice in writing or a voice through my pictures or my artwork. And a lot of the photography was so healing because it got me outside and it got me into nature. And all these studies we have now show how incredibly healing being in nature can be for
Yeah.
us. Anybody, it can benefit from it. So I think that was a huge piece for me, was not only being able to express myself and have a voice and tap into that inner child, but be out in healing spaces with my camera and exploring those and feeling the safety and the nurturing of nature itself.
Beautiful. Yeah, I know that your childhood things can get snatched from you when you've had abuse. And sometimes they go a little bit underground. But as you say, you were able to tap back into it and restore some of those feelings of connectivity and safety and all. Very important. I had my music, and I'm an
Mm,
only child of 2 hijackals. So I had my music, and that was the saving grace. They would never, ever interrupt me if I was playing the piano.
mm,
So in order to avoid my father, I would play the piano till 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning.
wow.
So, I think that tainted, I've done all kinds of things with music in my life, but, there was always that feeling like, "This is what's keeping me safe."
Hmm. Hmm.
So here we have someone saying, Mystique said, "The same thing happened to me, Denise, my granddad. I was very young and the damage was deep. I'm sorry this happened to you."
I'm sorry that it happened to you too, Mystique, and I'm hoping that you're finding some healing as you're going along your journey, finding whatever works for you to help heal.
Mhm. And Ernesto says, well, for the record, I was abused at aged 4 by a sister who was 18.
Mm.
So difficult. And yes, we're sorry it happened to you too. And it robs you of the innocence of your childhood. It makes you think about things that a child should never be thinking about. It shouldn't
Mhm.
even be on your radar. You should be safe and secure and protected and be able to be just your age and think just your age's thoughts and have just your age's experience. You know, um, so Latoria said, I really need to join the community to give my healing a boost. Well, you're very, very welcome to do that. Um, and Ernesto brought up a good point. He said, I brought it up because I wanted everybody to know what happens to guys too. It's not
Mhm.
just a gender specific thing. What Denise tells us is awful, and it happens every day to many. And sadly, Ernesto, you're absolutely right. It's happening right now to way too many people, right in this moment, whether they're children or whether they're adults. It is happening. And it is so very, very important to be telling our stories and saying what helped, what
Mhm.
actually helped. So, aside from being in nature and using your art, were there any other practices that really sustained you or gave you comfort or allowed you to process what had happened to you?
Yeah, I think that outside of therapy, yoga was incredibly important to me. So, ironically, I got into yoga because I heard it was really good when you're pregnant and we were trying to start a family. We never did have children, but that got me into it. My type A personality. Okay, we plan and then we go ahead and get started.
Yeah.
So I found a yoga studio I was very comfortable in. There was a man that did the beginning classes, so it was a little challenging. And I at first was challenged by certain poses that left me feeling exposed. I was like
Mm.
very anxious to in those, but I didn't want to stand out, right? You didn't want to be noticed. And then the practice that I was doing, they do a lot of adjustments, physical adjustments, healthy, purposeful physical adjustments to get you into the right position for the poses. And that was a little intimidating. But I finally sat down with the instructor and explained what had happened. And based on the statistics that we know, not surprisingly, his sister had been abused. And so he totally understood. And we worked through here's some alternatives. So you don't have to do the poses that I'm going to ask other people to do. You can do these instead. You won't stand out. And if you're not comfortable with adjustments, we'll wait. And slowly I gained trust. And for me, it was very, very important to learn to connect with my body. I mentioned before I dissociated during the abuse, had hated my body, and now I was learning to connect again with my body,
Mhm.
release some of those body memories and sensations, and learn to trust my body, learn to appreciate it and its strength and its flexibility. And really, it was a huge transformation for me to reconnect to my body and learn to appreciate it and take care of it. I mistreated it, treated it like a machine and used it till I dropped. And now I really understood what my body could do for me if I was kind to it and had self care.
Yes, and that's a very important thing. I was working with a client the other day and I said, "How are you doing?" She said, "Well, I feel so selfish." I said, "Why do you feel selfish?" Because I invited her to do a few things for herself. She said, "Well, I feel so selfish. I could be doing other things when I'm doing those things you told me to do." And I said, "No, it's not selfish. It's self-care."
Mhm,
And it is
mhm,
so important for us to recognize that, because I too, when I was 19, I started studying yoga from a book, because way back then there wasn't anything, and I actually had one of the first yoga and health retreats. I started it and brought all that along with yoga therapy and all. I'm a Shivananda certified teacher. So I also studied a lot of Iyengar and with Iyengar in India. So the kinds of adjustments and things, I'm very familiar with what you're talking about. But how wonderful that you took the step to go and talk to the instructor and that the instructor understood. That is
mhm.
so wonderful, because
And
it
we're
is it is
yeah,
important to be understood.
And we're at a really wonderful point now because they actually have trauma informed yoga that teachers are specifically trained how to deal with people who've gone through trauma and what it means for these people to let themselves be vulnerable in the different positions and to practice yoga. So it's a step further along than what you or I experienced. It's a really wonderful opportunity, and I think that that's something that's really needed, that we have an appreciation that there are special needs for people who have gone through trauma,
Mhm.
and they can still take advantage of this practice with a little more awareness and understanding on the part of the teacher.
Absolutely, and one of the things that's very important in that situation is when we've been abused, we tend to contract. We
Mm,
tend to make ourselves smaller, and it's a subconscious thing, and sometimes it will show up in the posture. So when you can actually allow yourself to expand and you can take up space and you can open up areas of the body, then you actually get so much benefit from it that
mm.
then informs your emotional self, which can be so important. I'm just noticing here that, people are chatting and they have similar stories, but Ernesto is saying to Mystique, here you are, and you found a safe ground to share and release it. And that's the important thing. That's what, as you're saying, yoga and art and all those things, but the therapeutic journey is about finding safe ground to talk about it and release it and replace some of the feelings you have about yourself, your safety in the world, and the safety around other people with new ideas, new ways of being, and try them out. Get your training wheels and try them out while you're with your therapist. For people who want to work with me, you can find me at forrelationshiphelp.com. That's always there for you. And I'll put it up on the screen for you, and so that you can know. It's also the name of my YouTube channel. So yeah, you can go to youtube.com/for relationship help. But I'm always happy to work with you and have that. I really want you to read Denise's book, though. Go to Thriving After Sexual Abuse book.com. I'm going to put that up for you too. Here we go.
And the book is really, like I said, it can be a blueprint. I walk through my story at the beginning to give you some context around my experience. And then each of the chapters that follow is the different things that I did and explored that helped me on my healing journey.
Yeah.
And at the end of those chapters, I give some questions and I encourage people to journal and discover for themselves what might actually work, whether it's yoga or meditation, being in nature. And at the end of the book, at the second half of the book, rather, there's some hard questions that I think people can kind of work through about what happened when and who knew, who should you tell, how do you share
Mhm.
that with your partner, just things to explore, and if you should confront or not. Obviously, all of these things I encourage someone to be in therapy, working with the therapist to support them through that effort.
Yeah.
And at the end of the book, I give a collection of poems that I wrote that sort of a journaling of my healing process. I wrote that then when I first started doing yoga, and a lot of stuff was coming up. So you see the beginning with my abuse, and through poetry, you see my progression. And it's just another example to share with readers how they might express their stories. I
Mhm.
don't ask anyone to do anything they're not comfortable with. I don't expect people to do it my way. I want them to explore it their way. And all these things I bring up is for you to explore and you to make a choice for yourself. I never had to confront my abuser because he died
Yeah.
before I was old enough to really have that choice. That was taken away from me. But it's something for people to look at. And if it's very personal and you want to just share with your therapist and no one else, that is your choice. If you want to share with friends, if you want to be on social media, whatever is your comfort level and what will support your healing, that's what you need to decide to do for yourself.
Absolutely, and so well said. I just put up here again, if you're interested in my emerging empowered community, go to joinintoday.com. But it's really so individual, as you're pointing out, how much you want to disclose to whom, what's healthy for you to disclose. sometimes people just disclose to the therapist, and
Mhm.
that's fine, because then you can emanate out from there with your new ideas, your new perceptions, your new perspectives, and just emerge in a more empowered way. Sometimes it's really important to tell family members what happened so that they understand what was going on in the dynamic of the family. Sometimes that's something that doesn't work very well. Sometimes it's necessary to charge these people, and absolutely the right thing to do, because they shouldn't be preying on children. It absolutely is verboten in every way. You're not allowed to. It's just not safe. So all of those things are such a part of the journey, and I'm so glad that you came along and shared this with us. I know that people are appreciating it in the comments. We've just had a couple of more comments here. Certainly people are speaking to one another of what they have been through. But there's another person thanking you for sharing your story, Denise, and another person thanking you for writing the book and telling us about your experience. And she says, I can't wait to read it. So go to thrivingaftersexualabusebook.com, Sandy, and you can read it and benefit from it. So thank you for being my guest today, Denise.
Thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure to share my story, and hopefully, we've inspired people to know that they're not alone and that there is a path forward to being more than just a survivor, to really being a thriver.
Absolutely. And if I can help you on your journey, go to forrelationshiphelp.com, FOR, relationshiphelp.com. Safe place to talk. Come over to joinintoday.com. Be with other people who are on the journey, know the journey, are recovering from the journey, and be there. It's safe. So until we meet again, you know what I'm going to say. If you've ever watched the show, I am going to tell you, be very good to yourself, because you are precious and you matter. I'll look forward to talking with you again soon. Take good care.